Chapter 20. The cold wind tousled Arthas's white hair, caressed his face, and he smiled. It was good to be again in the colder part of this world. The elven land, with its eternal early summer, heavy with the scents of blossom and growth, had made him uneasy. It reminded him too much of the gardens of Dalaran, where he had spent so much time with Jaina, of the snapdragons of the Balnir farm. Better the wind to scour him clean, and the coldness to quell those memories. They no longer served him, but weakened him, and there was no room for weakness in the heart of Arthas Menethil. He was, as ever, atop his loyal horse, invincible. He had had a bad moment in Quel'Thalas, when the bastard king and Astarion had cowardly attacked an innocent steed, rather than its rider, severing its legs in the same way that in life had caused Invincible's death. The incident had catapulted Arthas back in time to those horrible moments, shaking him to the core, and in the case of the battle with an Astarion, unleashing an icy rage that in the end had served him well. Before and behind him, his army marched through the snowy pass, untiring, unaffected by the cold. Somewhere in among their ghastly numbers floated a banshee. Arthas would let Sylvanas be for the moment. He was more interested in Kel'Thuzad, who glided beside him almost serenely, if such a word could ever be applied to a lich. He was the one who had directed the scourge to this remote, frozen place, and Arthas had until now not questioned. But the trek was getting boring, and he was curious. The prince felt a smile curve his lips. "So," he quipped, "you're not upset about me killing you that one time?" "Don't be foolish," the undead necromancer replied. "The Lich King told me how our encounter would end." That surprised Arthas. "The Lich King knew I would kill you?" He frowned, glancing down at the blade that stretched across his lap. It was silent now, dormant. No whispers came from it, nor did the runes pulse with power. "Of course," Kel'Thuzad responded, a hint of superiority in his sepulchral voice. "He chose you to be his champion long before the scourge even began." Arthas's unease deepened. No one had asked him, or even told him about his destiny, but would he have embraced it had he known? No, he decided. He did not like being manipulated, but he knew that he had to be tempered if he was to be a formidable weapon. He had to go step by step to his fate, otherwise he would have rejected it. He would then still be with Jaina and Uther, and his father would. If he's so all-knowing, then how can the Dreadlords control him like they do? "They are agents of the one who created our master, the fiery lords of the Burning Legion." The word sent a shiver through Arthas. Burning Legion. 2 words only, but the power they promised was heady somehow. In his lap, Frostmourne flickered. "It is a vast demonic army that has consumed countless worlds beyond our own." Kel'Thuzad's voice was almost hypnotic, and Arthas shut his eyes for a moment. Behind the closed lids, scenes played out in his mind as the Lich spoke. He saw a red sky arcing over a red world. Over a ridge poured a wave of creatures. They ran like hounds, but no natural beast were they. They had fearsome jaws crammed with teeth, and strange tentacles sprouting from their shoulders. Stones crashed to the earth, leaving trails of green fire to come to life as animated rock that marched on their foes. "Now it comes to set this world to the flame. Our master was created to pave the way for its arrival. The Dreadlords were sent to make sure he succeeded." The scene in Arthas's mind shifted. It was looking at an ornate carved gateway. He knew it to be the dark portal, although he had never seen it with his own eyes. It radiated green fire, and a host of demons were clustered around it. Arthas shook his head and the vision evaporated. So the plague in Lordaeron, the citadels in Northrend, the slaughtering of the elves, it was all just to prepare for some huge demonic invasion. Yes. In time, you will find that our entire history has been shaped by the coming conflicts. Arthas pondered this. Frostmourne was definitely awakening, and removed the gauntlet from his right hand to caress it. Cold. Bone cold it was. So cold that even his Death Knight's hand, which had been tempered for such a task, ached as he touched it. He felt the whispers again, and smiled. "There is more, Lich, is there not?" he asked, turning to regard Kel'Thuzad. "You have said that the Dreadlords imprison our master. Tell me now." Not possessing flesh any longer, Kel'Thuzad had no facial expressions with which to betray his emotions. But Arthas knew by the slight hunching of the undead's form that he was uncomfortable. Nonetheless, he spoke. "The first phase of the Lich King's plan was to engineer the Scourge, which would eradicate any group that might resist the Legion's arrival." Arthas nodded. "Like the forces of Lordaeron and the High Elves." He felt a vague nod in the pit of his stomach, but he dismissed it. "Exactly. The second phase is to actually summon the Demon Lord who will spark the invasion." The Lich shifted a bony finger and pointed in the direction in which they traveled. "There is a nearby encampment of orcs who maintain a functional demon gate. I must use the gate to commune with the Demon Lord and receive his instructions." Arthas sat quietly atop Invincible for a moment. His mind went back to when he had fought orcs alongside Uther the Lightbringer at Strandbad. He recalled the orcs had performed human sacrifices to their demon lords. He and Uther had both been disgusted and appalled. Arthas himself had been so infuriated that Uther had come to lecture him on not fighting with rage in his heart. "If we allow our passions to turn to bloodlust, then we will become as vile as the orcs," Uther had chided. Well, Uther was dead, and while Arthas was still killing orcs, he was now working with demons. A muscle twitched near his eye. "What are you waiting for?" he snapped, and urged Invincible into a gallop. The orcs fought bravely, but in the end, it was futile, as all attempts to halt the Scourge would be futile. Arthas galloped forward, Invincible leaping nimbly over fallen orc bodies. He regarded the gate for a long moment. 3 stone slabs, strangely elegant for so brutal a race. Erected nearby, though, were huge animal bones that glowed a dull red hue. In the confines outlined by the slabs of stone, green energy swirled sluggishly. A passage to another world. Jaina would be intrigued, but too horrified to pursue her curiosity. That was what made her weak. It was what made her Jaina. "The brutes have been slain," Arthas spat. "The demon gate is yours, Lich." The skeletal form shivered with delight, floating forward and lifting his arms importantly. Steps led up to the archway. Arthas noticed that the Lich did not ascend any of them. He stood at the bottom, out of respect, or out of more pragmatic desire to avoid harm. Arthas hung back, watching intently from atop Invincible. "I call upon thee, Archimond. Your humble servant seeks an audience." The green mist continued to swirl. Then Arthas realized he could make out a shape, features that were both like and unlike the Dreadlords he was more familiar with. The being had what Arthas guessed to be blue-grey skin, though with the green light tingling him, it was difficult to be certain. There was no question, however, that the demon's body was powerful, with a mighty barrel chest, large, strong arms, and a lower body that seemed to be shaped like that of a goat. Archimonde's legs curved back, ending in a pair of cloven hooves instead of feet. A tail twitched, perhaps belying Archimonde's calm, in-control demeanor. Arms, shoulders, and legs were encased in golden, gleaming armor adorned with shapes of skulls and spikes. Twin tentacles, long and thin, dangled from his chin. But the most arresting feature of his elongated face were his eyes, which glowed a sickly green color that was brighter and more compelling than the green misted world around him. Even though Archimonde was not yet here, not yet physically in this world, Arthas was not unmoved by the demon's presence.
"You called my name, puny lich, and I have come,"
said the demon, his voice resonant and seeming to vibrate along Arthas's very bones.
"You are Kel'Thuzad, are you not?"
Kel'Thuzad bowed his horned head. He was all but groveling, Arthas noted.
"Yes, Great One, I am the Summoner. I beg of you, tell me how I may expedite your passage into this world. I exist only to serve." "There is a special tomb you must find,"
the demon lord intoned. His gaze flickered to Arthas, examining him for a moment, then dismissed him. Arthas found himself growing annoyed.
"The only remaining spellbook of Meneve, the last guardian. Only his last incantations are powerful enough to bring me into your world. Seek out the mortal city of Dalaran. It is there that the tome is kept. At twilight, 3 days from now, you will begin the summoning."
The image disappeared. Arthas stared at where he had been for a long moment. Dalaran, the greatest concentrations of magic other than Quel'Thalas in Azeroth. Dalaran, where Jaina Proudmoore had trained, where Jaina still would probably be. A flicker of pain blinked through him for an instant. Dalaran is defended by the most powerful magi in Azeroth, he said slowly to Kel'Thuzad. There is no way to hide our approach. They will be prepared for us.
"As Quel'Thalas was,"
Kel'Thuzad laughed, a hollow sound.
"Think how easily this army crushed them. They will do the same here. Besides, remember, I was a member of the Kirin Tor, and close to Archmage Antonidas. Dalaran was my home, when I was nothing more than mortal flesh. I know its secrets, its protective spells, ways to slip inside they never thought to properly guard. It is sweet to be able to visit terror upon those who would have seen me abandon my path and my destiny. Do not fear, Death Knight. We cannot fail. No one, no thing can stop this scourge."
Out of the corner of his eye, Arthas caught movement. He turned and beheld the floating spirit that had once been Sylvanas Windrunner. She had obviously been listening to an entire conversation and seen his reaction to his new orders. "This talk of Dalaran moves you," she said archly. "Silent ghost," he muttered, despite himself remembering the first time he had entered the gate of Dalaran to escort Jaina. The innocence of that time was almost impossible for him to conceive of anymore. "Someone there you care for, perhaps? Pleasant memories?" The damn banshee would not let up. He surrounded his anger, lifted a hand, and she writhed in pain for a moment before he released her. "You will say no more of this," he warned. "Let us be about our task." Sylvanas was silent, but on her pale, ghostly face was a savage smirk of satisfaction. "I can help." Jaina's voice was calm, calmer than she actually expected it to sound. She stood with her master, Antonidas, in his familiar, loved, wonderfully disorganized study, gazing at him intently. "I've learned so much." The Archmage stood gazing out the window, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, as if he were doing nothing more serious than looking down at students at practice. "No," he said quietly. "You have other duties." He turned to regard her then, and her heart sank at the expression on his face. "Duties? And Terranas, light rest his soul, because of his refusal to listen to that strange prophet, he ended up murdered by his son, and his kingdom lies in ruins, inhabited only by the dead." Even now, Jaina cringed at the statement. Arthas. It was still so hard to believe. She had loved him so much. Loved him still. Her constant prayer, silent and known only to her, was that it was under some sort of influence he could not resist. Because if he had done all of this on his own will... I, too, was asked. And I, too, had arrogance to assume I knew best. And so, my dear, here we are. We all must live, or die, with our decisions. Antonidas smiled sadly. Her eyes stung with tears she blinked back and refused to shed. "Let me stay. I can't..." "Keep safe those you have promised to take care of, Jaina Proudmoore," Antonidas said, a hint of sternness creeping into his voice and mien. "One more or less here will make no difference. Others look to you now." "Antonidas!" Her voice broke on the word. She rushed toward him, flinging her arms around him. She had never dared embrace him before. He had always intimidated her far too much. But now, he looked old and frail, and worst of all, resigned. "Child," he said affectionately, patting her back, then chuckled. "No, you are a child no longer. You are a woman, and a leader. Still, you had best go." From outside a voice rang out, strong and clear and familiar. Jaina felt as though she had been struck. She gasped in sickened recognition, pulling back from her mentor's embrace. "Wizards of the Kirin Tor! I am Arthas, first of the Lich King's Death Knights. I demand that you open your gates and surrender to the might of the Scourge." "Death Knight?" Jaina turned her shocked gaze to Antonidas, who gave her a sad smile. "I would have spared you the knowing, at least for now." She reeled with the knowledge. "Arthas, here." The Archmage strode to the balcony. A slight flutter of aged, gnarled hands, and his own voice was as magnified as Arthas's had been. "Greetings, Prince Arthas," Antonidas called down. "How fares your noble father?" "Lord Antonidas," Arthas replied. Where was he? Right outside? Would she see him if she stepped beside Antonidas on the balcony? "There's no need to snide." Jaina turned her head away and wiped at her eyes. She struggled to speak, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. "We've prepared for your coming, Arthas," Antonidas continued calmly. "My brethren and I have erected auras that will destroy any undead that pass through them. Your petty magics will not stop me, Antonidas. Perhaps you've heard what happened in Quel'Thalas. They thought themselves invulnerable as well." Quel'Thalas. Jaina thought she might be sick. She had been here in Dalaran when the word had come, from a handful of survivors who had managed to escape, about what had happened to Quel'Thalas. So too had the Quel'Darai prince. She had never seen Arthas so angry, so shattered, so raw. She had gone to him, words of compassion and comfort on her lips, but he whirled and gazed at her with such a look of fury that she instinctively drew back. "Say nothing," Cale had snarled, his fist clenched. She could see, to her shock, that he was barely restraining himself from physically harming her. "Foolish girl, this is the monster you would take to your bed." Jaina blinked, stunned at the crudeness of the words coming from one so cultured. But he was not interested in hearing anything she had to say. "Arthas is a butcher. He has slaughtered thousands of innocent people. There's so much blood on his hands that the whole ocean could ever wash them clean. And you loved him. Chose him over me." His voice, normally so mellifluous and controlled, cracked on the last word. Jaina felt quick tears come to her eyes as she suddenly understood. He was attacking her because he could not attack his real enemy. He felt helpless, impotent, and was striking out at the nearest target. At her, Jaina Proudmoore, whose love he had wanted and failed to win. "Oh, Arthas," she said softly. "He has done terrible things," she began. "What your people have suffered." "You know nothing of suffering," he cried. "You are a child, with a child's mind and a child's heart. A heart that you would give to that. You slaughtered them, Jaina. And then you raised their corpses." Jaina stared at him mutely, his words having no sting now that she knew the reason for them. "He murdered my father, Jaina, just as he murdered his own. I should have been there." "To die with him? With the rest of your people? What good would throwing your life away do for—" No sooner had the words left her lips than she realized that it was the wrong thing to say. Arthas tensed and cut her off sharply. "I could have stopped him. I should have." He straightened, and coldness suddenly chased away the fire in him. He bowed low, exaggeratedly. "I will be departing Dalaran as soon as possible. There is nothing for me here." Jaina winced at the emptiness, the resignation in his voice. "I was a fool of the greatest order to ever think any of you humans could aid me. I will leave this place of doddering old magi and ambitious young ones. None of you can help. My people need me to lead now that my father—" He fell silent and swallowed hard. "I must go to them. To what pathetically few remain. To those who have endured, rebirthed by the blood of those who now serve your beloved." He had stalked off then, fury etched in every line of his tall, elegant body, and Jaina had felt her own heart ache with his pain. And now, he was here. Arthas was here, at the head of the army of the undead, a death knight himself, and tonight as his voice startled her out of her reverie and she blinked, trying to return to the present moment. "Pull your troops back, or we will be forced to unleash our full powers against you. Make your choice, Death Knight." Antonidas stepped back from the balcony and turned to regard Jaina. "Jaina," he said in his normal voice, "we will be erecting teleportation blocking barriers momentarily. You must go before you're trapped here." "Maybe I can reason with him. Maybe I can—" She fell silent, hearing the unrealistic wanting in her own voice. She hadn't been able to stop him from murdering innocents in Stratholme, or going to Northrend where she was certain it was a trap. He had not listened to her then. If Arthas was indeed under some dark influence, how could she dissuade him now? She took a deep breath and stepped back, and Antonidas nodded softly. There was so much she wanted to say to this man, her mentor, her guide, but all she could do was give him a shaky smile. Now, as he fought what they both knew would likely be his last battle, she found she couldn't even say goodbye to him. "I'll take care of our people," she said quickly, cast a teleportation spell, and disappeared. The first part of the battle was over, and Arthas had gotten what he had come for. Arthas had obtained the requested spellbook of Medivh. It was large and curiously heavy for its size, bound in red leather with gold bindings. Across its front was an exquisitely tooled black raven, its wings outspread. The book still had Antonidas' blood on it. He wondered if that would make it more potent. Invincible shifted beneath him, stamping a hoof and shaking his neck as if he still had flesh that could be irritated by flies. They were on a hilltop overlooking Dalaran, whose tower still caught a light and gleamed in hues of gold and white and purple, while its streets ran with blood. Many of the Magi who had fought him hours before stood beside him now. Most of them were too badly damaged to be of any use other than his father to throw at attackers. But some could still be used. The skills they had in life harnessed to serve the Lich King in death. Kel'Thuzad was like a child in winter veil morning. He was persuading the pages of Medivh's spellbook, thoroughly engrossed with his new toy. It irritated Arthas. The circle of power has been prepared per your instructions, Lich. Are you ready to begin the summoning?
Nearly,
the undead thing replied. Skeletal fingers turned a page of the book.
There is much to absorb. Medivh's knowledge of demons alone is staggering. I suspect that he was far more powerful than anyone ever realized.
A blackish-green swirl had begun manifesting as Kel'Thuzad spoke. A Tichondrius appeared as he finished. Arthas' irritation deepened as the Dreadnought spoke his usual arrogance.
Not powerful enough to escape death. That's for certain. Suffice to say, the work he began, we will finish. Today, let the summoning commence.
And that quickly, he was gone. Kel'Thuzad floated into the circle. The space was marked out by 4 small obelisks. In the center, a glowing circle with arcane markings had been etched. Kel'Thuzad bore the book with him, and once it fluttered into position, the lines of the circle flared to glowing purple life. At the same moment, there was a spitting, crackling sound, and 8 pillars of flame sprang up about him. Kel'Thuzad turned to gaze back at Arthas with glowing eyes.
Those who yet live within Dalaran will be able to sense the power of this spell,
Kel'Thuzad warned.
I must not be interrupted, or we will fail.
I'll keep your bones safe, Lich, Arthas assured him. As Kel'Thuzad had promised, it had been comparatively easy to enter Dalaran, slay those who had erected specific spells against them, and take what they had come for. Arthas had even been able to kill Archmage Antonidas, the man he had once thought so very powerful. If Jaina had been there, he felt certain she would have confronted him, appealed to what they had once had, as she had done before. She would have had no better luck than she had then, except he was glad he did not have to fight her. Arthas' intention suddenly snapped back to the present. The gates were opening, and Arthas' grey lips curved in a grin. Previously, the Scourge had had the element of surprise on their side. Yes, many powerful Magi lived in Dalaran at all times, but there was no trained militia, nor were all the Magi of the Kirin Tor in Dalaran. They had had several hours, and they had not been idle. They had teleported in an army. Good. A solid fight was just what he needed to drive distracting thoughts of Jaina Proudmoore and the youth he had once been to the back of his mind. He lifted Frostmourne, feeling it tingle in his hand, hearing the soft voice of the Lich King caress his thoughts. Frostmourne hungers, he told his troops, pointing the sword at the armor-clad defenders of the great mage city. Let us sate its appetite! The Scourge army roared, Sylvanas' anguished wail rising above the cacophony. causing Arthas to grin even more. Even in death, even though she obeyed his commands, she defied him, and he relished forcing her to attack those she would have preferred to defend. Invincible gathered himself beneath his rider and surged forward at a full gallop, whinnying. Some of his ghastly troops stayed behind to defend Kel'Thuzad, but most of them accompanied their leader. Arthas recognized the livery of many of those whom the Kirin Tor had teleported in to defend the city. Friends they had once been. But that was all in the past, as irrelevant to him as yesterday's weather. It was getting easier now, to feel nothing but satisfaction as Frostmourne, glowing and all but singing as it feasted upon souls, rose and fell, cutting through plate as easy as flesh. After the first wave of soldiers fell, raised to serve the scourge or abandoned where they had fallen as to new use, a second one came. This one had magi with them, clad in the purple robes of Dalaran, with an embroidered symbol of the great eye upon them. But Arthas, too, had additional aid. The demons, it would seem, wished to protect their own. Giant stones screamed down from the sky, their tails streaked of fell green fire. The earth shook where they struck, and from the craters caused by the impact climbed what looked like stone golems, held together and directed by the sickly green energy. Arthas glanced over his shoulder. Kel'Thuzad hovered, his arms spread, his horned head thrown back. Energy crackled and coursed from him, and the green orb began to form. Then, abruptly, the Lich lowered his arms and stepped out of the circle.
"Come forth, Lord Archimond,"
Kel'Thuzad cried.
"Enter this world and let us bask in your power."
The green orb pulsed, expanding, growing taller and glowing yet more brightly. Suddenly a pillar of fire shot skyward, as several answering lightning bolts crackled down outside the circle. And then, where they had been nothing, a figure stood, tall, powerful, graceful in its own dark and dangerous way. Arthas returned his attention to the battlefield. A retreat sounded. Clearly the Magi, at least, had seen what was transpiring, and their troops wheeled their mounts and galloped back toward the safety, temporary though Arthas suspected it to be, of Dalaran. Even as they fled, a deep, resonant voice cut through the sound of battle.
"Tremble, mortals, and despair. Doom has come to this world."
Arthas held up his hand, and with that simplest of gestures, the swarm of scourge halted and retreated as well. As he galloped back to Kel'Thuzad, eyeing the giant demon lord all the while, Tikhonidrus teleported in, as usual, after all the danger had passed. The dreadlord made a deep obeisance. Arthas drew rein some distance away, preferring to observe.
"Lord Archimond, all the preparations have been made." "Very well, Tikhonidrus,"
replied Archimond, giving the lesser demon a dismissive nod.
"Since the Lich King is of no further use to me, you, Dreadlords, will now command the Scourge."
Arthas was suddenly very grateful for all those hours spent in disciplined meditation. It was only that kept his shock and fury from showing. Even so, Invincible felt the change in him and pranced nervously. He yanked on the reins and the undead beast stilled. The Lich King was of no further use? Why? Who exactly was he? And what had happened to him? What had happened to Arthas?
"Soon I will order the invasion to begin. But first I will make an example of these paltry wizards by crushing their city into the ashes of history."
He strode off, his body erect and proud and commanding, his hooves landing firmly with each step, his armor gleaming in the rose and gold and lavender of the encroaching twilight. Beside him, still making obeisance, strode Tichondrius. Arthas waited until they were some distance away before he finally whirled on Kel'Thuz's side and burst out. "This has got to be a joke! What happens to us now?"
Be patient, young Death Knight. The Lich King foresaw this as well. You may yet have a part to play in his grand design.
May? Arthas whirled on the necromancer, his nostrils flaring, but he tamped back his anger. If anyone, either of the demons or the Lich King himself, though for one moment that Arthas was a tool to simply be used and then discarded, he would soon show them the error of their thinking. He had done too much, lost too much, cut out too much of himself for this to be cast aside. It could not all be for nothing. It would not all be for nothing. The earth rumbled. Invincible shifted uneasily, lifting his hooves as if to minimize contact with the earth. Arthas glanced up quickly at the Mage City. The towers were lovely at this time of day, proud and glorious, and glittering in the deepest twilight hues. But as he watched, he heard a deep cracking noise. The apex of the tallest, most beautiful tower in the city suddenly fell. Slowly and inexorably, tumbling downward as if the length of the tower had been clenched by a giant, unseen hand. The rest of the city fell quickly, shattering and crumbling, the sound of destruction loud and thumping in Arthas' ears. He winced at the volume, but did not tear his eyes away. He had instigated the fall of Silvermoon, had directed his scourge against it, but there was casualness about it, and ease. Silvermoon had been a hard-won prize. Archimonde appeared to be able to shatter the greatest of human cities without even being present. Arthas thought about Archimonde and Tichondrius. He scratched his chin thoughtfully. In his lap, Frostmourne glowed.